look at today's lesson. You will learn to talk about advice, obligations, and permission. You will improve your telephone manner. You will explore future forms for scheduling and organizing. You will be exposed to future possibilities. For now, let's jump straight into advice, obligations, and permissions. So, here we have a couple of characters, and let's look at some sentences that we might hear from these people. So here we have a doctor, and he says you shouldn't go to work for a day or two. Then here we have a police officer, and she says you have to obey the law. And we've also got a fireman who says you must be brave to do my job. And finally, we have a young lady here who says, I can stay up very late. My mom says I'm allowed to. Now, what words here are showing advice, obligations, or permission? What do we think, guys? So what words in these sentences are showing either of these, advice, obligations, or permission? Okay, I see Nagla says shouldn't, Kerry says have to, Bozika says must, exactly. Lots of good answers. Must, have to, shouldn't, exactly. Can, brilliant work, guys. So here we can see shouldn't, have to, must, can, allowed to. Okay, so very good work, everyone there. And these are all modal or related verbs. So can, am allowed to, should, must, have to. Now we have seen a lot of modal verbs already in this course. And some of these we've seen already, like can and should. But remember, modal verbs like this have a lot of different uses. So for tonight's lesson, we are only looking at advice, obligations, and permission. So let's start off with advice. And we know that advice is telling people what you think is a good idea, like a suggestion, a recommendation, advice, what you think is a good idea. And we know the main one we can use here is should. And this is used to give advice and recommendations. For example, you should be careful in that part of town. Okay, maybe it's a bad part of town. You should be careful in that part of town. People who are overweight shouldn't eat fatty foods. So remember, with modals like this, we can contract them, just like our auxiliary verbs, like have not, am not, do not. We can contract the modals. So should not becomes shouldn't. People who are overweight shouldn't eat fatty foods. Okay? And Dalal is asking, is food a countable noun? That's a very good question, Dalal. Food can be both countable and uncountable. For example, as an uncountable noun, I would like some food. Okay, but then we can look at it as a countable noun when we look at types of food. Okay? So, if we're talking about types of food, then it is countable. Exactly, Marwa. Different kinds of food. Exactly. So it can be both countable and uncountable depending on the sentence. Should I see the Colosseum when I visit Rome? So here we have a question, okay, asking for advice. Should I see the Colosseum when I visit Rome? And for anyone who has never been to Rome, you definitely should visit the Colosseum. It's absolutely fantastic. So I don't know if many of you, we do have a lot of Italian students, I know, so they'll probably be able to tell you. But I was in Rome just before Christmas, and the Colosseum is fantastic. Nagla is asking, what is the Colosseum? It's very hard to explain now. It's a large amphitheater in Rome. If you Google it, you'll know. Okay, but if you ever go to Rome, you should definitely visit it. Now, we know we can use should for advice, but we can also use the modal must. And this is used to give strong advice. So should is just for a recommendation, must is for strong advice. For example, you must go for a walk with the dog at least once a day. Strong advice, you must go for a walk. Not you should, you must go for a walk with the dog at least once a day. You must practice more if you want to run a marathon. So you must practice more if you want to run a marathon. You mustn't tell Pablo about the surprise party. So you can see it's strong advice. Of course, you mustn't tell Pablo about the surprise party. Now, we also use must for obligations. So remember, like I said, these modals can be used for many different things. We use must for advice, but we can also use it for obligations. So, obligations are things we are bound or obliged to do. Okay? Now, that might be hard to understand. Things we are bound or obliged to do. What does that mean? For example, you are obliged to look after your children. That's what we mean by an obligation, okay? Once you have a child, you are bound to them, okay? You are obliged to look after them. If you, for example, well, we're going to see the examples now. I can't think of an example off the top of my head. So let's look at must, like we said. And must is used for a personal opinion of what is necessary or written rules. For example, I must go now. Okay, if you are late for work, for example, I must go now. It's a personal opinion. It's a personal obligation. I must go now. I must remember to get a present for Fatima. Again, this is a personal opinion of what is necessary. I must remember to get a present for Fatima. Passengers must fasten their seatbelts. I'm sure you recognize that from being on any aeroplane. Passengers must fasten their seatbelts. Exactly, Fatima. It's like a commitment. Exactly. It's like a commitment. So passengers must fasten their seatbelts. So these are a personal opinion of what you think is necessary or written rules. Now, next up we have to. Now, this is for what somebody in authority says is necessary or an external obligation. But in speaking, they are used very similarly, and have to is often used more. So people often use them interchangeably. Must is used a lot more in written English. But I mean, the real difference is must is for a personal opinion of what is necessary, and have to is for an external obligation or what somebody in authority says. So Yasmin, authority is like the law or your boss, your manager, the police, the law. That's authority. So for example, I have to go now. Like we said, lots of people just use them interchangeably. I must go now, I have to go now. He has to get 50% to pass the exam. It's not a personal opinion. It's what somebody in authority says is necessary. It's external. He has to get 50% to pass the exam. Do I have to wear a uniform to school? Okay? Is it a rule? Is it imposed by authority? Do I have to wear a uniform to school? Now, like I said, the positive forms are very similar in meaning, and often people use them interchangeably. But the negatives have a completely different meaning from each other. Now, look at this. You mustn't forget. And what that means is, don't forget. You have no choice. So you mustn't forget. You have no choice. You don't have to go means there's no obligation. You have a choice. So look at the difference between the negatives. There's a big difference. Where in the positives, we can use one or the other when we're talking. In the negatives, they have a very different meaning. You mustn't forget means you have no choice. But you don't have to go means you have a choice. Like if I said to you, you don't have to go to the party. You still can if you like. But if I say you mustn't go to the party, then you don't have a choice. And there's an easy sentence to remember which can help you remember this. In a non-smoking area, you mustn't smoke. But in a smoking area, you don't have to smoke. So that's a very good sentence to help you remember the difference between those negatives. In a non-smoking area, you mustn't smoke. But in a smoking area, of course, you don't have to smoke. So that's a very good sentence to remember that difference. And finally, we are going to look at permission. And permission is allowing someone to do something or being allowed to do something. And of course, the first one, am allowed to. Okay, so the verb here, allowed. And this is used to express permission to do something. Used to express permission to do something. For example, I am allowed to have friends over to my house. The dog isn't allowed to come into the house. Are you allowed to answer phone calls in school? So you're asking about permission. Are you allowed to answer phone calls in school? Is the dog allowed to come into the house? No, the dog isn't allowed to come into the house. Okay, so that's the main one we use to express permission. But of course, informally, we can use the word can. So this is used to ask for permission or informally express it, okay? As we all know, look at this question. Can I go to William's party? Can I go to William's party? You are asking permission. It's just like saying, am I allowed to go to William's party? I can't have friends over on weekdays. And Amr, the meaning of over here means I can't have friends over to my house. I can't have friends come to my house. Okay? That's what we mean by over. I can't have friends over on weekdays. You're expressing permission informally. Exactly, Mohammed. Can I open the window? Asking for permission. Can you answer phone calls in school? So it's the same as are you allowed to? Just asking a little less formally. Okay? Now, as I said, these modals have many meanings, especially can. We know that can has lots and lots of different meanings, but we mustn't get confused. For now, we're only looking at advice, obligations, and permission. So we mustn't get confused. So let's have a question to make sure you are not too confused. So which is the best modal to use in the following sentence? You blank drive on the left in Ireland. So which modal is the best to use in the following sentence? Must, are allowed to, can, should, have to. So what do we think? What do we think? So, which side of the road you drive on would be a law, okay? That's a law from the government or from your country. So what do we think? What is the law? So there's lots of answers coming in. Lots of people are saying must. Lots of people are saying have to. And it's not the easiest one. There's lots of different answers coming in. It's split 50-50, I think. But the correct answer is have to. You have to drive on the left in Ireland. And why is that? Because it's the law, okay? It's an external obligation from an authority. It's a state law. It's from authority. It's an external obligation. So we would use have to. Remember, must is used for personal obligations. Have to is used for external obligations. So good work to everyone who got that one correct. It's not an easy question. Of course, people will say must, but I said which is the best modal, and I taught you the difference. So that's why the correct answer is have to. Okay, so well done to everyone who got that one correct. And now we're going to move off that and look at telephone manner. And Drishia said, oh man, it's not too difficult. We just had to think. We just had to think. So let's move on and look at telephone manner and start off by looking at our top tips. And top tips for telephone manner. So all of these, the past 4 lessons have been leading you up to helping you to speak confidently. So this is where we are going to bring that all together. Because if you are talking to someone on the phone, you have no facial expressions, you have no body language. It's all about your spoken language. So this is very important. So let's look at my top tips for telephone manner first of all. Of course, answer calls quickly. That goes without saying. It's nothing to do with English. It's just polite to answer calls quickly. Have confidence. That is one of the main things. Even if you make small grammatical mistakes, just continue on with your flow. Have confidence when you are speaking. For example, if I'm talking to all of you like this, and every now and then I make a mistake, you won't even really notice it if I keep speaking at the same tone with the same flow. Now, for any of you who have a good ear, you will have realized that I made a grammatical mistake in that last sentence. But because I kept the flow and kept speaking with the same pitch and confidently, you didn't even notice it. Exactly. Kerry has said make a mistake. Okay, so it still sounded like I was speaking fluently, even though I made a mistake. So that's what I mean when I say have confidence. Just have confidence to use the language that you have learned. There's always going to be words you don't know. You're going to make mistakes. Even when I speak, sometimes I make grammatical mistakes. But it's okay. I'm fluent and I make small mistakes sometimes. Be polite and professional. Of course, many people have to speak on the phone when they are in work, so be polite and professional. Practice as much as possible. It is always best to practice. You will only get better from practice. If you have any opportunity to speak English, take it. If there is someone you can speak English with, always practice. It's the only way to get better. You can listen to as many of my webinars as you want. You can do as many exercises online. You can watch as much English television as you want. Unless you practice, you're not going to develop your spoken English. Dalal has said, even native speakers make mistakes. We shouldn't worry too much then. Exactly, Dalal. Exactly. As long as you are getting your point across, then your fluency is still at the same level. For example, if you take an IELTS test, there is only one part of the grading that is your grammar. Another part of it is the flow of how you speak, your fluency, okay? So how many stops and starts, and if you have to stop and go, so grammar is only one small part of it. Intonation is important. Now, what is intonation? That is probably a new word for a lot of you. Intonation is the raising and lowering of your voice. Okay, so for example, we know that when you ask a question, you raise your voice towards the end of the question. Okay, so if I say, do you like Mark's classes? Your intonation goes up at the end of a question. If you are sad or saying a negative statement, your intonation goes down. How was your weekend? Oh, it wasn't too good. See, the intonation goes down. So intonation is important. It's how you use your voice. Use contractions. So I've told you about this before. In spoken English, we use contractions. It makes you more fluent. It makes you sound more fluent. It makes you sound more natural, like a native speaker. I will becomes I'll. Do not becomes don't. You are becomes you're. Okay, in spoken English, contractions are always good. Use quantifiers to sound more polite. We looked at quantifiers in lesson 3, so we know what quantifiers are. They are words like a bit, a little, quite, etc. And we know that we can use them to sound more polite. So don't forget about that. Use the modals to make your speech more formal. Okay? So if you're on a business phone call, you can use the modals to make your speech more formal. Could, would, can, may, etc. Okay? We've looked at plenty of modals so far in the course. So use them, use the quantifiers. It all improves your spoken English. Now that we've looked at the top tips, let's move on and look for some useful vocabulary when talking about phones or talking on the phone. Okay, Rawan has a good question. Contraction for informal only or both formal and informal? So in general, contractions are informal. But most of the time in spoken English, we use contractions. They're not necessarily informal in that sense, okay? They are informal in the sense if you are writing a formal letter, you would not use contractions. But even when speaking to someone formally, you would use contractions, okay? Alfred says, contractions in an essay, are they common? That depends on the style of essay, Alfred. It's very hard to answer that. Usually in an essay, I mean, if it is a thesis for university, no, you would not use contractions. If it is an essay where you are, I don't know, talking about your weekend, then you would use contractions. So you need to decide yourself, really. The formality, is it formal or informal? So let's look at some useful vocabulary for phones. Now you might know all of these, but there might just be some words that you didn't know. So of course we have a mobile phone or a cell phone. So in America and Canada, they would call it a cell phone. Most other places would call it a mobile phone. Although nowadays we just call it a phone because everyone just calls it your phone. A smartphone is a phone with internet capabilities. So almost everyone has a smartphone these days. A landline is the phone you would have in your house or in your office, okay? A phone that is not portable, a phone that is connected by a telephone line. So we would call that a landline. So your house phone or your office phone. Exactly, McGarry, it's a fixed phone. Then we've got a caller, and we know from the ER that that is an agent noun, so it's a person. The person who is calling, so the caller. So if I call Molita, then I am the caller. Then we've got silent, which of course is the setting on your phone. So if you put your phone on silent, it does not make any noise. It doesn't ring, it doesn't make any loud noises. Low battery is of course when your phone has low battery. A missed call is when you do not pick up, when you do not answer a phone call. Answering machine or a voicemail is when your phone takes a message if you don't answer. Then we've got a text message or an SMS. So depending where you are from in the world, in Ireland we just say a text. Different places call them different things. I know in South Africa they do call them SMS. And then a country code is, for example, the number you put in front of your phone number if someone's calling from a different country. So America is +1. Ireland is +353. That would be called your country code. McGarry says it's 002 for Egypt. Okay. And then the line is if you have somebody on the phone, you have somebody on the line. You might have 2 or 3 different lines. Okay. Then we've got some verbs that are used especially for telephones. To dial is to enter a number. Okay, so if you dial the number, you enter the number. Sally is asking, is the receiver the opposite of caller? Yes, you could say the receiver or the recipient. The recipient we would probably use more often. So to dial is to enter the number. To ring means to call someone. So ring would be used a lot more in conversation than call. I would say, I ring my mother at the weekend, okay? I will give you a ring tomorrow. So I would say ring a lot more often than call. It's a lot more conversational. To pick up is to answer, and to hang up is to end a call. So these are phrasal verbs. So we've seen phrasal verbs before. They don't translate to the exact meaning of what we say them. So to hang up, obviously to hang something is like to hang your clothes in your wardrobe. But to end a call, we would say to hang up. Okay? Hang up that phone now. To be busy means you're already on a call. To call back means to call someone who called you first. So I can't speak at the moment. Can I call you back or can I ring you back? And then to charge your phone is to recharge your phone battery. So if you say, I need to charge my phone, you are recharging your phone battery. And let's look at how to use some of them in sentences. So my phone is out of battery. I need to charge my phone. I rang him, but it was busy. I will call him back later. Your phone is ringing. I put it on silent. Hang up that phone and listen. Okay, so there's just some ways you would use them in sentences. So some of these verbs that we only use when talking about telephones or telephone calls. Now that we've looked at the useful vocabulary, guys, I want to give you some useful phrases for using on the phone. So whether you are having an informal phone call with a friend, or you are having a formal phone call to do with work. Okay, Dalal is asking, is it correct to say my phone battery is about to die? That is perfectly correct, Dalal. My phone battery is about to die. If a battery is dead, it means there is no charge left. You've no battery left. So we would say, yeah, the battery is about to die. Exactly. Or my phone battery is flat. That's okay as well, Carrie. Yeah, that's okay. Or you could say, I'm out of battery. That is how I would say it most often. I am out of battery. Or I have no battery. So there's many different ways to say it. Now let's look at some useful phrases that we use. And let's start with the introduction. And of course, you could answer by saying, hello, the most obvious. Hello. Or hi, it's Mark here. I'm trying to get in touch with Mark. So if you are the caller, I'm trying to get in touch with Mark. Is Mark there, please? But of course, don't forget when to use formal language. So if you are on a business telephone call, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. Could I speak to Mark, please? Or if you are the recipient, this is Mark speaking. So look at the difference between the informal and the formal. Hi, it's Mark here. This is Mark speaking. Is Mark there, please? Could I speak to Mark, please? So using the modals makes it more formal, as we know. Now, what if you're looking for more information? Again, our informal ones. Who's calling, please? Who's speaking? Who is it? Who am I speaking to? Okay, they are obviously informal. You would not say, who is it, on a formal phone call. So let's look at some formal ones. May I ask who's calling? Where are you calling from? Could you put me through to Mr. Kennelly, please? So that is extremely formal. Could you put me through to Mr. Kennelly, please? Is that definitely the right name or number? Okay, some nice formal ones. If you have to work on the phones, these are very helpful, okay? So Megarius is asking, why not who I am speaking to? Well, Megarius, we know that when you make a question, we begin a question with the auxiliary verb. So, I am speaking to is positive. For example, I am speaking to you, Megarius, right now. But to make that a question, we switch the order. We bring the auxiliary verb to the front. Am I speaking to Megarius? So, therefore, when it's a question, we know that the auxiliary verb comes first. Who am I speaking to? Okay, so I hope that answers your question. Alfred is asking, Mr. with the full stop. One is American, one is the English use, right? Well, Alfred, in general, you can just use whichever you want. There used to be a difference traditionally, but nowadays it's just up to you whether you want to include the full stop or not, okay? Now, let's move on to our next situation, negative information. Okay, so again, we'll start with our informal. Sorry, Mark's not here, so we're given negative information. Mark is out at the moment. Could you call back later? I'm afraid the line is busy at the moment, so this is a bit more formal. I'm afraid he's busy at the moment. Can I take a message? I'm sorry, he's out of the office today. You may have dialed the wrong number. I'm afraid there's no one here by that name. So they're all very formal. And this little phrase, I'm afraid, is very good. It just means I'm sorry, or I'm sorry to tell you. So I'm sorry to tell you the line is busy at the moment. I'm afraid the line is busy at the moment. It's a very polite little line. Now let's look at transferring or asking a caller to wait. So of course you can say, hold on a minute, or just a minute. That's a nice short conversational one. Okay, wait a moment, please. Now let's look at some more formal ones for work. Could you hold on a moment, please? Hold the line, please. I'll just put you through. So if you're transferring them to another line, I'll just put you through. I'll transfer you now. And then our last few, we've got phone problems. Now guys, remember, if you cannot understand the person on the other end of the phone, maybe they're speaking too fast, maybe it's a bad connection. Whatever the reason is, there is no problem with asking them to repeat themselves or to speak a little slower. They understand. It's not rude to ask someone to repeat themselves. It's not rude to ask them to speak a little louder. It's perfectly okay. There's nothing worse than continuing on the phone call when you can't properly hear or understand someone. So let's look at these. Sorry, I didn't catch that. So if you didn't hear what someone said, sorry, I didn't catch that. Say that again, please. I can't hear you very well. Sorry, this line is quite bad. Okay, so that's a nice one to use. Even if the line is not bad and you just can't understand them very well, that's a nice one to say, because then you are definitely not offending anyone. So if you can't understand a word they are saying, maybe they have terrible English, or maybe you have terrible English and you can't understand them, then this is a great one to say. Sorry, this line is quite bad. Could you say that again? Because you are not offending anyone, okay? And if I ever say that to you on the phone, then you know why I'm saying it. You need to pick up your English a bit, okay? I'm only joking. Sometimes the line is actually bad, I promise. Then we've got some more formal ones. I'm afraid I can't hear you very well. Would you mind speaking up a bit, please? There's nothing wrong with saying that. I'm afraid my English isn't very good. Could you speak slowly, please? Again, there's no problem saying that. The person on the other end of the line will have no problem if you say that. They will understand. Okay, your English isn't very good. I will speak a little slower. Could you repeat that, please? The most obvious one that we hear all the time. Could you repeat that, please? Now, at some point, you may need to leave or take a message. So let's look at something we would use there. So first of all, we'll look at taking a message. I'll ask him to ring you when he gets back. Or if you're leaving a message, could you tell Mark that I called, please? I'll let Mark know that you rang. Okay, very simple sentence. Oh, I'm sorry, Dalal, speaking up just means to speak louder, okay? To raise the volume, okay? We would say speak up. I'm sorry, could you speak up a little? Okay, so it means to speak louder. Very good question, Dalal. Okay, then some more formal ones. Can I take your name and number, please? Can I leave a message, please? Could you please ask Mark to call me back? Could you spell that for me, please? So if someone is leaving their name with you, could you spell that for me, please? Always good to check the spelling if someone leaves a name, because names can be spelled any number of different ways, okay? So it's always good to double check that. And then saying goodbye, okay? The easiest ones. Saying goodbye. Very simply, if it's informal, bye, talk soon, speak to you soon, okay? Just like you would talk to your friend. Then if it's a bit more formal, thank you for calling. Have a good day, have a good evening, have a good weekend, have a good holiday, whatever it is. Thank you for calling. And you could still say bye after it. Thank you for calling, bye. Okay, so these are all good for ending a phone call. Okay, so we had lots of good sentences there. And just to bring up what might be new words, repeat is obviously to say something again, and transfer is to send to another line. So I'll transfer you over to Mark. So I'll send you over to his phone, for example. Okay, Hen Mohammed is asking, speak down means slowly. Okay, we would never really say speak down. Speak up means to speak louder. Speak down we don't say. Okay, it doesn't really mean anything. Okay? Nelly is asking, if I want to ask him if he wants to leave a message, what could I say? Well, Nelly, very simply, you would simply ask, would you like to leave a message? So, for example, I'll let Mark know that you rang. Would you like to leave a message? Okay? Very simple. Very simple. Okay. Ahmed is saying, then say, I love you, bae. Okay? Definitely shouldn't use that in a formal sense. Anyway. Okay. Kerry's asking, how would you tell a person if they were talking too loudly? Okay, well, very simply, you could say something like, could you speak a little lower, please? Okay, a little lower. Could you speak a little lower? Or you could just say, you are speaking very loud. Tell them straight up, you're speaking too loud. Shut up. Okay? Something like that. Only if they're your friends. If it's a formal call, definitely don't tell them to shut up. Okay, so a question for all of you. Which of these is the most polite for phone calls? Who is it? What's your name? May I ask who's speaking? Who's this? Give me your name. Okay, so which of these is the most polite? And it should be very, very obvious. And already I can see Sama and Ferdous, Bilal, I have had everyone. I can't see one person with the wrong answer. So yes, Joe as well, Nora. Of course it's number 3. May I ask who is speaking? We're using a modal to make it very polite, okay? May I ask who's speaking? Definitely do not say, give me your name, or who's this? That sounds a bit rude, okay? So, next we're going to move on to future forms for scheduling and organizing. So, often when we're talking on the phone, if you're leaving a message or making plans, you are using a future form to schedule or organize. So let's look. And I want to ask you first, what tenses what different ways can we talk about the future? So give me some of the ways we can talk about the future. And in general, we have 4 different ways that we use to talk about the future for scheduling and organizing. Okay, sorry, I had to take a little drink of water there. So I can see lots of people saying will, the future simple. Ibrahim says going to. Exactly, fantastic. Now, what are the other ways? Samar is saying the present continuous. Fantastic. And Saeed, I can see, has said the last one, the present simple. Okay? So although these 2 are present tenses, we do use them for scheduling and organizing in the future. Now let's look at the different ways we use these. And we'll start off with the normal future simple, will. And this is used for something you decide in the moment you're speaking, or a promise, okay? Now let's look at going to and look at the difference. Going to is used for plans which are already organized. So will is something you decide as you're speaking. Going to is for plans already organized. Let's look at some examples. I will call you back after work. So you're speaking to them on the phone. I'll call you back after work. He will not be able to ring me later. Okay, it's in the moment you're speaking. He will not be able to ring me later. He won't do your homework for you. We know that the negative will not can be contracted to won't. It's a strange one. It's not willn't, it's won't. So he won't do your homework for you. And then of course with the question, we begin with our modal. Will you give me a hand, please? So these are all things you decide in the moment, okay? In the moment. Now let's look at going to. I'm going to visit my parents next week. It's a plan. We're not going to have a meeting this week. Messi isn't going to play for Argentina anymore. Okay, Messi isn't going to play for Argentina anymore. So just like when we did the present continuous, we can contract we are, or we could contract are not. So this could be we're not or we aren't. It doesn't matter. Okay, Amr is asking, will you give me a hand, please? That just means, can you help me? Will you give me a hand? That just means, can you help me? Okay, to give someone a hand is to help them. Are Shaw Academy going to develop a Spanish language course? Okay, so it's a plan. It's a plan. You're asking, are they planning to develop a Spanish language course? Excuse me. So that is the difference between will and going to. Now let's look at the other two. And we'll start with the present continuous. Now we looked in lesson 2 at how we can use the present continuous for the future. It's used for plans close to now, and it usually includes a time. Then the present simple is used for routines or a scheduled event. So let's look at the present continuous. I'm Skyping my mother at 10 p.m. Of course, Skyping is to call someone on Skype. Okay, so Skype has developed into a verb in the English language. So you can say, I will Skype you later. I'm going to Skype my mother next week. I'm Skyping my mother at 10 p.m. So it just works like a verb. It has developed into a verb in the English language. We're not going to the party this weekend. We aren't getting the train home. Is she doing the interview later? Okay, so plans that are close to now, usually with a time. And then the present simple is for routines or a scheduled event. Okay, so for example, the bus leaves at 8 a.m. every morning. Exactly, Omnia. A routine is like a timetable, something that happens all the time. Okay? The bus leaves at 8 a.m. every morning. We play, excuse me, something stuck in my throat. We play football after work on Tuesdays. I don't have a meeting later. So that's talking about a scheduled event. Okay, I don't have a meeting later, or I have a meeting later. When do we board the plane? When do we board the plane? That's present simple, but you're asking about the future. So Sarah is asking, what is the difference between I am going to visit and I am visiting? Okay, very good question, Sarah. I am visiting, we would use generally if it's very close to now and you're using a time. So for example, I'm going to visit France next year. Okay, I'm going to visit France next year. I am visiting France next week. Okay, or I am visiting my friend in France next week. So if it's close to now, we would use the present continuous. In general, we would use going to. Ibrahim, there's no rule for how close. It's just, I mean, there's no actual rule for it. It's just which sounds good. You can say, I'm visiting France next summer also. So it's not wrong to say, I'm visiting France next summer. So that's almost a year away. It's not wrong to say that. But just in general, if it's close to now with a time, we can use the present continuous. If you're not confident, you can always use going to. So you could say, I'm going to Skype my mother at 10 p.m. Okay, so you don't have to worry too much about it. Just know that you can use the present continuous to talk about the future. Now, let's look at a phone call here and let's see how these things would be used. So, here we have, let's do our phone ringing first. Pling, pling. That's my phone ringing. And then Jenny answers. Hello, Jenny speaking. I don't know whether I should do a woman's voice or not. It could offend people. But I find that I naturally end up putting on a woman's voice when I do this part of the lesson. And Andrisha is saying, yes, please. Okay. Hello, Jenny speaking. That's a terrible woman's voice. I'm very sorry about that. Hi, Jenny. This is Mark from the Shaw Academy calling. Hi, Mark. How are you? Very good, thanks. I'm just calling to remind you that your English course is starting tomorrow. Oh, yes, brilliant. What time does the lesson start? It's going to begin at 7 p.m. Irish time. Oh, I won't be able to attend it. I'm working tomorrow evening. That's no problem, Jenny. We record every lesson for the students who miss them. Great, I will watch the recording then. Thanks for the information. You're very welcome. Hopefully I'll see you for the second lesson. You definitely will. Goodbye. Bye now. Okay, so there we had a little phone conversation between Mark and Jenny about Jenny's English course. So, look at all the different things we used here to talk about the future, scheduling and organizing. We have the present simple. What time does the lesson start? We have the present continuous. Your English course is starting. We have going to. We have the future simple. Will not or won't. We have the present continuous. Future simple, future simple, future simple. So lots of different ways to talk in the future. And you can see how naturally they are used in conversation. And we use different ones in different situations. So let's look at a question here. Which of these is correct for a meeting planned for next week? I'm going to meet a new client next month. I will meet a new client next week. I have a meeting after work. I'm meeting a new client next week. So, which of these is correct for a meeting planned next week? What do we think? What do we think? What do we think? Lots of different answers coming in. I can see Samar and Dupti, Kadri, Marwa, Ezra. Not everyone, Bozika, Damien. Good work, Hager. Number 4. I'm meeting a new client next week. Why is that? Well, number 1, we have next month, so that's not correct. I'm sorry, that was a cheap trick, but it's not correct. And of course, will we only use if you've decided in the moment, so it's not planned, okay? So number 4 is the correct answer there. And now, guys, the final part of tonight's lesson, we are going to look at future possibilities. Okay, so we've looked at scheduling and organizing. Now we're going to look at future possibilities. So let's look at our cute little polar bears here. And our man asks, do you think the Earth will continue to get warmer? Okay, so do you think the Earth will continue to get warmer? And the young polar bear says, I'm not sure. It might. The mammy polar bear says, if we don't change, it could. Okay, so if we don't change the way we live, it could. And then the wise old papa polar bear says, yes, it will. Definitely. Okay? Yes, it will. Definitely. Now, look at these different words. Might, will, could. And this man says, polar bears may become extinct if it does. And then the young polar bear says, oh no, I hope it doesn't. Okay? And when we're looking at future possibilities, we of course use modals. And if something is definite, we use the future simple like we just learned. Will or going to. If it's 100%, we use definite, will or going to. But if it's only a possibility, we use might, may, or could. Okay? These are modals we use for possibility. Might, may, and could. Okay, Iham is asking about this word, extinct. So, extinct means if all of the polar bears die. Okay? So like the dodo bird. I don't know if any of you know the dodo bird. That is extinct. Dinosaurs are extinct. They no longer exist. They're all dead. Okay? As sad and pessimistic as that is, that's what it means. They're all dead. There's no more of them. Okay? So, let's look at how we use these different modals of possibility. Do you think you will pass the English exam? Of course, I will. And that is 100%. We use the future simple when it's 100%, okay? Of course, I will. I will pass the English exam. Now, let's ask her again. Do you think you'll pass the English exam? I might, but I'm not confident. Okay? I might, but I'm not confident. And might means there is a low possibility. Okay? I might win the lottery. I might win the 12-month Shaw Academy subscription, but I'm not confident. Let's look at our next answer. I could pass or fail. I really don't know. Okay? And could we use for like 50%. I could pass or fail. I really don't know. Okay? I could pass 50%. Or then, no, I don't think I will. My mother may not be happy. And may is used for a possibility also, but it's a little bit more formal. Okay? So it's the same, but it's a little bit more formal. So let's look at these. Will or going to, we know is 100%. You will enjoy Mark's course. Seriously, you're going to love it, okay? It's 100%. I won't like it. I hate English. So they are your 100% future simple. But then we've got our modal verbs, and we know we use subject, modal, and then the verb in the infinitive. So let's look at our modals of possibility. You could become fluent by taking the Ultimate English course. Could it be true? I might not be in work tomorrow. I feel sick, so I might go to see a doctor. And then we have may, which remember is a bit more formal. It may rain later. He may not get the job. The government may increase taxes this month. Okay, so it's more formal. And they are the modals of possibility. They're very simple to use. Okay, you might win the Shaw Academy 12-month membership in a couple of minutes. Who knows? Okay, so let's look at a question to finish off the lesson. Which of these sentences expresses a possibility of getting the job? So which of these expresses a possibility of getting the job? I might not get the job. I'm not going to get the job. I will not get the job. I won't get the job. So which of these is expressing a possibility of getting the job? What do we think? Exactly. Good work, Antonio, Bilal. Fantastic. Heba, Yehia, Paul. Fantastic. Of course, it's the first one because these three are the future simple. 100%, or in this case, 0%, because they are negative. So this one, I might not get the job,